Hey, good afternoon. My name is Carl Murphy. I'm the president and co-founder of Get Spiffy, and this is the Operations Underground podcast. Today, we're talking with Emma Hampton, our sales executive from the West Coast. She primarily handles what we call Region 2, which is California, Arizona, Texas, and every now and then some other places in the country. So Emma, tell us about where you're from. Like, where did Emma grow up, and what did childhood look like for you?
Okay. Well, hello. Thanks for. Emma grew up in North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh, and she was a busy girl. Always up to something, whether that was sports, school, projects at school, swim team, a lot of soccer practice, a lot of soccer. Yeah, just spent a lot of time around the city traveling for sports.
Did she always talk about herself in the third person?
It came out that way. Okay, yes, I guess so. I'll switch it now.
No, it's okay. It's okay. The other guys I've interviewed have not started to talk about themselves in the third person. So it's just sort of interesting. So you grew up in Raleigh and you did like the sports thing. How'd you end up in California?
Well, when I was young, something kind of came over me. I decided that UCLA was my dream school. Like, I was rooting for them in March Madness, and I was like, I'm down. And then as I got older, I kind of realized, okay, they've got a good sports program. Okay, they're actually a decent academic school. Okay, they're in Los Angeles. So all these things kind of really built my dream to go to UCLA, and luckily that worked out for me. So I came out to go to school, and then just absolutely loved it here. Loved the people I'm around all the time, and decided to stay.
So there's like a big thing, like a lot of the people I know, younger people from the East Coast want to come to California. What's the draw?
I think, there's the obvious ones, like it's warm most of the year, it's beautiful. I think there's definitely a component of moving from a small town like Raleigh or Cary and going into a more sophisticated, busy city where there's always things to do and different kinds of people and activities. I think, it's big city life. It's anything you can do.
Yeah, interesting. And so what'd you study at UCLA? What'd you do at UCLA? Like, so you're there for 4 years. What's that look like for you?
So formally, I studied my degrees in international development, which is basically understanding our relationship as, the global north or the developed world and the developing countries and kind of what we're trying to do to solve it, how that's going not so well, and do better. So sort of a poli-sci, econ, anthro, soc mixed degree about kind of the whole world, which was pretty cool. But kind of always knew that wasn't what I wanted to go into. And so had a lot of extra room in my schedule, did things like art classes and also took some entrepreneurship classes just because those are also things I was interested in. But spent a lot of time outside of school. I always had sort of a job or an internship just in my hands in something else. So that looked like working at the startup launch pad at UCLA for a little while. It was working for a few different internships with local nonprofit startup, a couple of different things. Server at the local bar, and then also for a florist. Got some my creative outlet through this flower.
Yeah, so tell me about the florist thing.
Well, so after my freshman year, I kind of have always had this like very strong creative urge, and if I'm not feeding it, nobody around me is happy. I'm a bitch. Like when I'm not expressing my creativity, and so kind of had that little itch come over me after my freshman year of college in the summer, and had kind of randomly been following this kind of more creative florist out of Venice who just had something that I'd never seen before. She was putting fruit and different branches and things into arrangements and had a life that I could see myself living, like by the beach and surfing and all these cool friends and dinner parties, and I was really, really drawn to just the whole thing, and so reached out to her one summer, just cold email, just said, I'm pretty inspired by your space. I just want to come hang out. You don't have to pay me. I just really want to like kick it in the studio. And she was like, actually I've got a couple things coming up. I could use your help. I'll pay you this and that. And so that was kind of the beginning where I was just sweeping the floors and carrying buckets, and then sort of grew into being able to design some of the flowers and loved it. It's a very peaceful, cathartic space to be in. It's cool, it's beautiful, it's artistic, and kind of stuck with it all throughout college. Spent a lot of my time.
Yeah, so I know the backstory on this. So there was like there's like delivering flowers to like, you know, famous people in Beverly Hills, which is sort of like cool if you live in LA. And then there's like they did a lot of weddings and stuff, and there's this whole logistics back side to it. So tell us about the logistics of like high-end flowers and weddings and parties and all that sort of thing.
Well, I would say the key logistic that's pretty difficult here is flowers die pretty quickly. So there's a lot of timing that goes into it of, okay, understanding which product are you going to use, where is it going to be, is it going to be inside, outside, what time of year is it, are we going to, Joshua Tree in August, or are we going to, I don't know, like indoors in some cold place in December? And so that's kind of the biggest variable that we're working with the whole time. And then so that comes into play, things like transporting and buckets and what time do we get the flowers. Like you can't really prep more than 2-3 days ahead of the event. So a lot of it is like strategic, setting up as much as you can ahead of time, the buckets and everything, so that you come in, the flowers immediately once they get home from the market are chopped fresh stems into water, if you have a cooler, into the cooler, and then slowly designed in the most effective way to kind of keep their lifespan in mind. And then getting all of that, transporting that, what kind of team do you need to, how much space do you have in the car, how many cars do you need to get them to the event safely so that they don't spill all over your car or get ruined. And so they're pretty fragile, but getting all that up to space, unloading it within 2 hours, and then
it was a key skill set when it came to Spiffy. One of the challenges I was on the sales team is for salespeople, we don't sell products, we sell services here at Spiffy, and so understanding the logistics of every client is a little different. And we have sort of a menu of pricing for consumers, but a lot of our fleet stuff is, it's 30 or 300 and somewhere in between. Are we doing one service or are we doing 1,000 services? And it literally runs that gamut. And so tell us about how that's so let's transition to working at Spiffy. So you came onto the sales team, and what was that like?
It was actually pretty intuitive. I think I had been kind of doing sales my whole life without even realizing it. Like I didn't consider it sales, but I would be, I was in Beta Club in high school, recruiting different partnerships that we would do volunteer work for, like cold reaching out to them, flowers, cold reaching out to them, same thing. So when I came here, I'm like, oh, this is just kind of what I like to do anyways, which was really nice that it felt natural and not like this really intimidating. But selling a service is, it's the second half of sales is basically like emotional intelligence. It's like understanding what the person needs and what their first priority is. And usually that's, is it timeliness? It's like one of our 5 value adds. Like, is it timeliness? Is it organization and technology? Is it and a budget? Like, you just have to understand that and then basically make sure that we actually execute on what we say we're going to execute on. So it felt intuitive, but I will say I like selling a service better because during the pandemic when we switched to selling chemicals and we were trying to sell disinfectant, that was a disaster. I did not enjoy that at all. So
Interesting. So the logistics of flowers, does that translate over to the logistics of Spiffy? Or how does that translate over?
So there's a little bit less gray area with Spiffy. At the end, like with flowers, you're chatting with the client. They're like, okay,
Our chemicals don't wilt.
Chemicals don't wilt, and
oil doesn't spoil.
Oil doesn't spoil, and oil is oil. Like, service is service. You get the oil change, done. Like, black and white. Like, that's a service. Flowers are so much more like, okay, we kind of want soft fall as our palette, which, depending on the availability of the flowers, is like light pink and light orange, or like maybe it's yellow, or maybe it's brown. Like, there's a little bit more artistic creativity up to the interpreter of the translation here. Whereas we've got 10 cars, we need them changed by Sunday.
Yeah, no,
Please.
None of our clients have ever asked us for the soft fall palette.
No, maybe with the detail work, we get some pretty pesky clients there, but not as much with the
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. So what do you like most about your job at Spiffy?
It's changed over time, but I think I think that I like most there's a little bit of this it's very goal oriented. It's very reach for a very specific task that usually has a number associated with it and hit it, and then do that again and again. And I think that has always been with my brain. That works with my brain where there's very tangible progress. And then I like doing that. The way that you get to do that is through these emotional challenges and reads of all these people that you meet all the time. I think my emotional intelligence feels like it's grown where I can immediately understand what someone's looking for in a conversation now, both inside work and outside of work, which I think is pretty cool too. I think those are kind of.
And so then what sucks at Spiffy as a sales rep? What
sucks at Spiffy? I don't dig it's difficult when there's a few things that are difficult. It's difficult when so we have this product, yes, it's like selling in a perfect world and selling in the real world. Where in a perfect world, we have infinite technicians who are infinitely perfectly trained. Nothing ever goes wrong. The trucks are always working. There's always the exact number of cars that the client says they're going to have. This relationship between ops and sales and the client is seamless, which is rare. And so you can try to set it up and, there's all this communication that you're trying to maintain all the time, but navigating the account management of all right, we've sold it. They're agreeing to have us. Yes, but the job's not over. For me or for anybody, it's just beginning then. So I would say that doesn't suck, but it's just, there's more to be done once you sell the client.
Yeah, there's certainly a fair amount of, I think once the sale is made is when it begins.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's a fair amount of account management to make it successful between, all three parties, as you said, right? There's the sales team, which set a certain amount of expectation with the client, then that needs to be conveyed to the operations team. And then there's the client. It's look, you said there's going to be X amount of demand. We staffed for it. These guys should go somewhere else. There's going to be 20 PMs a day or 50 details. That's different than 1 PM and 2 details, right? From the standpoint of people, we're just not, there's not a warehouse with a robot putting stuff into a package and shipping it out, right? It's humans delivering services and trucks. And then what's always interesting when I talk about our business to people is how varied the wash detail standards are. Again, the PMs things are the maintenance side of our business is interesting because it's pretty straightforward. Car has 6 quarts of oil. We take 6 quarts out. We put 6 quarts in. We change the filter. It shouldn't leak or be messy. Right? That's pretty straightforward. Cleaning a car. We clean cars for $20. We clean cars for $2,000, literally.
Yeah.
And so what's the expectation? What's it look like when it shows up? Did I need a hazmat suit and a shovel to start cleaning the car, which happens sometimes?
That's very real.
Right. Or is it just the car's pretty clean, it's got some dust on it, we need to wipe it off and we're good to go, right? And, I've always found that difficult on the sales side to ask those questions to customers because the customer doesn't understand that, right? The customer, they just have their business, right? So the consumer just has a dirty car and they go to a car wash in town and we're sort of competing with that. And they're different than, the FedEx company or the rental car company or the bus company or whomever our clients are, because we sort of service. If it has, I used to say if it has wheels and a transmission, we clean it, but we even clean stuff without wheels and transmission. And we change oil and stuff without wheels and transmissions. And so tell me some stories about Spiffy. What's some of the wackiest stuff that's happened here? I know that there's been some stories that go down.
Yeah, I think
remember, this is public, so we need to
I think the most famous, most brutal story that maybe has made its way around the Spiffy network so far was probably my second week of work out here in Los Angeles. I'm fresh college grad, first real big girl job. And my previous boss had been out with me before, but then he went back home. Chris, our local GM out here, he's on PTO. Carl had come into town for a few days. he's heading out of PTO, and we've got this account that we had just, a brand new account that we had just launched at a kind of swanky music label company in West Hollywood. And so it was a wash event. We're supposed to wash all these, like, 20 cars this day. And again, music labels, so like very, very nice cars across the whole thing was super nice cars. I'm out there like
the cheap cars were like Lexuses and Porsches.
Yeah, right? It was ridiculous. And tiny parking lot, because also LA, West Hollywood, so tiny parking lot. They end up halfway through the day moving us to like a driveway in this residential neighborhood behind the office. So kind of difficult conditions, but the clients, they're cool. And I'm just kind of there helping facilitate, making sure the guys are on time, doing all the stuff. Again, second week of work, so not helpful that much, but I'm there. And of course I'm like, okay, I'll get the guys some water, come back from the CVS, and the supervisor on site goes, Emma, don't look, but like 2 cars hit each other. Okay. So 2 technicians rammed into each other, both driving a separate client's car. We've got a super nice Audi, super nice Mercedes, both with pretty serious damage on them. I'm like, guys, I was gone for 5 minutes. How did this happen? But this is my first week of work. I had no idea what to do. So these very angry clients come out. They start yelling at me. I'm like holding back tears. I'm trying to call Carl. He's like, figure it out. He's like, this happens every week for 5 years. He's used to it. I'm like, this is a disaster. Chris, PTO, my boss is on the East Coast. He's checked out of work. Nothing. So I'm like, so, listen to this woman scream at me. And then the other guy's like pretty cool, hippie, who goes to Burning Man every year. So just panicking the whole time, but I guess I get enough information to let everybody let me go home, go with the guy. I have to get him a rental car that costs thousands and thousands of dollars. It was absolute chaos, but now we're 2 years in, that stuff happens.
It doesn't happen every week. It does happen from time to time.
A little more.
I was a protagonist in that story. It was sort of funny. It's funny in hindsight. It was a great customer. And then again, things happen. This is the difficulty, stitching it back to the logistics. Like, we had a really good setup for logistics. Like, when we set up these sites, we set them up so that we don't have to move cars. We're not backing them up, right? It's safe. We can open the doors without dinging cars, right? So we have this whole sort of like checklist. We don't really publish it to the customer because it just seems complicated to them. But we orchestrate this behind the scenes. Like, we want to do this. And then the customer shows up and like changes it like in the middle of operations, and the customer's always right, and so we roll with it. And in this particular case, the customer, Emma was like trying to take care of the guys because it was like, I think it was July 4th.
Yeah.
And I was at the site, and I'd been at another site, and we were super busy. And I said, hey, look, Em, I'm leaving. It's like 2:00 on a Friday. You're good. I think my guidance was like, don't damage anything. Make sure you check the windows, right? Because again, we had some new employees. Generally, back in the day, we've sort of resolved this through some other technology, but we used to have a lot of problems with like getting streaky windows or having clean windows. I said, check all the windows. Make sure you don't lose the keys. Because in this issue you have with keys is like, you'll have like 3 Honda minivans, right? And the keys look the same, and you could give the wrong keys, and then one person drives away, or there's all this sort of weird stuff that happens. And so we had systems for us. Look, don't screw up the keys, check the windows, and then, give me a call when you're done. I'm heading to the beach, and she calls me nearly in tears because this thing happens. And then ironically, or not ironically, I would say, yes, ironically, it's always like the executive's cars this happens to. Like, you wash 50 cars at a location, and it's like the owner of the company and the senior vice president, we happen to like ding their 2 cars, right? And
the assistant of the CEO is like, I think I told her first. Like, I saw her first. I'm like, do you want me to tell her, or do you want to? Right. She's like, this is going to be painful. She's like, this will suck. I'm like, I can do it.
Well, and the funny, and we can talk about this next, but like, being a young woman in the workforce, and our industry is primarily men, right? It's like our whole warehouse. Like, we might have one woman who works here. Like, Emma's like the only woman who works here. And interestingly, like the person, so there's one dude who was like a mid-level guy whose car got damaged. He was sort of chill. But then the senior executive was like a woman. And then afterward, you're like, I thought we were supposed to be on the same team. She's like yelling, screaming at me. I said, yeah, that's some BS they gave you at UCLA. Like, you dinged her car. She doesn't care who you are.
Yeah, no, did not care.
So, okay, so tell us. So, yeah, interesting story. Again, for the general public, we don't damage a lot of cars, and we do take care of them. And we're still servicing those customers. Well, a couple of years later. So what's it like being a young woman in a male dominated industry?
I think I almost want to say it's a good thing. And maybe that's bad to say, but it's definitely built my confidence. I mean, you just have to walk into any room and just say, "Where's the fleet manager? Give me this." I do think that, especially at the beginning, I kind of noticed it. Like if I would go on site with Justin, my boss, or with anybody else who was a guy, like they were talking to the guy, like they were just talking to him. And part of that is because they're more senior than me. They probably know more than me because I'm brand new. But part of that is because they just feel more comfortable, or because they don't believe, this and that. So, it's definitely been sometimes a challenge when I'm with other guys to like, no, this is my account. Like you're dealing with me, not them. That's the only time that it really feels challenging. Other than that, I usually try to keep it pretty like light and friendly, and usually a pleasant encounter. And so I think that it's like, what does this girl in a dress doing in this office? But it kind of works, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned in training you is, and I think this is for young people. This is not a young woman thing. This is a 22 and it's my first job. Is controlling, as a salesperson, it's controlling the communication and controlling the management team, right? And so I remember we had this conversation. I said, look, when we go on a call, who talks? What's the objective? And who's talking and saying what? And then sort of what is, how do we deal with sort of like craziness? Because every, like 1 in 5 sales calls goes crazy. Either the customer doesn't want to talk to you, or they're crazy, or they come up. You thought you were going to do 10 cars and they have 1,000. How do you deal with that? And we brought on some new younger folks, in the ensuing couple of years. So you've been here like 2 years, right?
2.5, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, I was thinking about this. I had this specific conversation with a young woman on the East Coast. And I said, look, when I show up, or your regional manager shows up, or the VP of sales, or Scott, the CEO, you need to clearly state, this is the objective of the meeting. This is what I'm going to do, and this is what I need you to do. Right? And then, you can, and some of it's just like fly air cover, and I'll look at you and say, Carl, what do you think? And that's like your turn to take over. Or some of it's like, this guy's like crazy, and I need you because I've been here 3 times. And either of those scenarios is fine. It's just making sure on the way in you have that sort of thing going on. Mm-hmm. I learned that as a young sales rep. I had a really good trainer with this company called Parametric Technology, and there's 2 guys, Tim Cavins and John Kaplan, and they were excellent at it. They're excellent at running sales meetings, but just like, hey, what do you need me to do? And it was a pretty high pressure place, and so there was always a lot of intensity around all the meetings. It's a really good thing. So, so what other stories you have from Spiffy? Like, so what do you think the difference is in like Los Angeles versus like the East Coast? Do you think there's a difference in our business?
I think there's a difference. What I can notice, at least, is Raleigh feels a lot different than any of the other cities. And I think that's just my perception. I go there, but there's like, the HQ's there. So there's like a full team there. It just seems like the energy is different. Everywhere else is kind of like, I've been to 10 different markets from Denver, Colorado, Texas, everywhere. And each one of those kind of feels like, and including LA, but, I've been here for long, but they all kind of feel like they're on their, like everyone's on their own, not island because that sounds isolated, but everyone's like on their own little operation that's, satellite from the HQ, and at HQ it feels like that's where all eyes are on that space. And so I don't know how that plays out that much into operations. I mean, everyone's kind of doing the same thing in each market, but something about the energy there, each one feels, that's the only thing that I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of my challenges is bringing that Raleigh headquarters energy to every city consistently, day in and day out, week in and week out. One of the things we do, and I've tried to eliminate it and cancel it at several times in the past, and there's been like a mild insurrection, is the weekly operations call. Yeah. Right. So every Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, basically everybody in the company is on a call.
Yeah.
And we have everybody in the headquarters has like a 2-minute sort of update, and it's really communicating with everyone in the company. These are the things that are going on in human resources or engineering or account management or sales. So everybody gets a couple minutes there, and so it keeps people online or on track. And then everyone in the field, and we've experimented or rotated through different scenarios, but it's an accountability call for what'd you do last week in revenue and profit, right? So we forecast revenue and profit every week, and then they have to, our week runs Monday to Sunday, so literally on Monday you have to like, what happened last week, and why were you successful or why were you not successful? Again, as a business, we are not, certainly as founders, Scott and I are sort of anti-meeting, and I've tried to get rid of it, and people love it. They love it.
I think it's a good thing. I like it. I mean, I think our team is also at a perfect size, at least conceptually perfect size, where there's one main guy in each city, and then salesperson occasionally. I think it does bring unity, and we're all dealing with the same SEC team, the same FAM team. It's unified. Yeah, totally, and I think that helps.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact we were like pre-pandemic Zoomers, so we were Zooming in like 2018. I think we brought in Zoom 2019. I think it was right around the end of 18, beginning of 19. I think we were Zooming before you showed up, even. I think. Yeah, and so because we used to do conference call, right? So it's like you dial in and you look at a speaker in the center of the you look at a speaker in the center of a table. And I was in, I forget where I was, but I was like in Dallas, and I was doing the ops call, and someone in like San Francisco was speaking, and someone in the call in the warehouse just made this call, like, that guy sounds huge. I'm like, he sounds huge? What does that mean? He's like, I don't know. I just envision that guy. He's like 6'3". He's like an offensive lineman for the Los Angeles Rams. And I'm like, I start laughing. So why are you laughing? I'm like, he's like 5'2", like 100 pounds. Like, if you put a sweatshirt on him and hose him down, he may be 105. And like, really? I'm like, yeah. It's like, God, we should like, it'd be not, So then we went through this whole like, do we do photos? Like, we should everybody have a photo, right? But the photos are static. And what I found is like the guys in operations, they just never smile, right? So you have these like mug shots, right? Basically, guys. It's like, I don't want mug shots. And then we looked around, and fortunately, the cool thing about 21st century is technology is pretty cheap, and so we started doing Zooms, and it was interesting, and it's been a big benefit for us. And again, I think it was a plus for us going into COVID. We didn't have to like add that and figure it out. That was just we were, everyone's talking about the distributor work now, and so we've always been remote just by nature of the business, and so.
Yeah, I think adding the Zoom component to the sales call was cool too. I mean, the sales call is only ranging from 3 to 6 people max usually, but call in, it's kind of disconnected. You know who's talking on, whatever. I don't care about what's going on there, whatever. But now it's like, like you see the same people every week. It's kind of more camaraderie. It's more fun.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like my mom's like 84, and I was working from home one day, and she like just popped in. She lives in the same town I do, and she popped in for some random reason. Shows up at my house randomly on a Monday morning. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, why my Zoom call? Like, you need to like get out of the screen. And then so she's like looking over my shoulder, like at the screen. And she's like, well, why does everyone have different backgrounds? I said, well, like the 21st century, like decorating your office is basically the JPEG image behind you, right? She's like, well, how do you do that? I'm like, well, you can do videos. There's all kinds of cool. She's like, how does that just does? And so it's been interesting to see folks who have, what photos they like. Like Scott Crystal has the one with this giant T-Rex in the back. Mm-hmm. We have, early on, we were driving trucks across the country, and we would send guys past like monuments, right? Like the Arch in St. Louis or some national parks or signs or whatever, and we get pictures in front of them. And so we have all these funky photos of spiffy vans with, a balloon like parade, like 50 hot air balloons behind it, or on the verge of Yellowstone Lake, or the Grand Tetons are in the background. Right?
I think that would be the only other funny story. Because I was on one of those. I got shipped across the country.
Oh, that's right.
That was a good one where I was on the East Coast visiting some family back at home. We were at the beach. It was like...
Yeah, you were on PTO. You're on vacation.
Yeah, I was like on vacation. It was Memorial Day weekend or something. We're at the beach. But it was like right before I went on PTO, or maybe, I don't know, whatever. They were like, oh, like we I think we had just gotten a new account in LA, and this is pandemic, because they were like desperate for any accounts in LA. We need a new truck. And they're like, well, how are we going to get a truck there? And someone like offhand, not anyone, someone who's rarely on the call, and he goes, oh, well, Emma, like, aren't you going back home? Like, you could just take it. Like, kind of joking. And Carl's like, that's happening. Latched on me. He's like, okay, that's it. I'm like,
that's a great idea.
I'm like, I'm kind of down. Like, I've never driven across the country before. So within the next day, my mom was livid. She's like, you're not doing that. Like, no, you're not allowed to. No, like, live it. And I'm like, Mom, I think it'll be kind of fun. Whatever. And so, sure enough, show up at the Spiffy warehouse, jump in the van. But the worst part was the Geotab was still on, which beeps at you if you drive more than 65 miles per hour, which is way below the speed limit for most of Texas and New Mexico. So I'm like, within 10 minutes, I'm like, you got to turn this off right now. I'm not doing this if it's going to beep at me above 70. So that was my only request. They got it handled, and I drove 3 days by myself all the way across. And showed up in LA, and that was it.
Yeah, the Geotab is, Emma got her experience as being a technician. Like, this is what happens if you speed. Emma did not speed across country. She just, we raised the speed to 70 or 75, I think, before it started beeping. And it has like a 5 mile per hour buffer. So like before you hit it, it starts beeping, and it has this particularly annoying sort of beep. It
was brutal.
it is brutal. I don't really understand how technicians speed in vehicles with that going off. It's well designed to incent you to follow the speed limit, which for the most part guys are doing. That's interesting. I forgot about you drove the van across country. I remember Zarate calling me. Chris Zarate's her general manager. He's like, hey, Emma's not back at work. It's like, what, did she like extend her vacation? I said, no, I think she's like in Oklahoma. Why is she in Oklahoma? She's got your van, dude. She's like bringing your van to California.
And Scott Crystal, as soon as I showed up, he was like nervous. Like, he called me, and like, I showed up in Phoenix to get the chemical, the disinfectant, which I think was the whole mission. And
well, that's right. Jacob, you didn't come just to Los Angeles. You had to go through Phoenix to pick up some supplies.
Jacob,
right?
the GM there, he comes in. Hey, I'm Jacob. Nice to meet you. Crystal's giving me strict orders to make sure your tires are okay, check your windshield wipers, give you a new, like, make sure the car is safe to drive. He was panicking, so everyone was happy that I made it.
Yeah, Scott likes to adopt employees as his children, which is a positive quality. He does go overboard on that sometimes. It's interesting.
Could be worse.
All right, so that's like your spiffy career. So what's like the future hold for you? Emma's like a young professional, a couple years in sales. What's going on in the next couple of years? Where do you see yourself?
I mean, I've always been kind of in the back of my mind that I want to build my own company, and I'm not in a huge hurry to do that. And it definitely seems like an extremely enormous mountain to take on as I've watched this Spiffy life unfold. But over the past years, I mean, throughout college, I always interned at startups, and then now I've got this, and I've done the marketing roles, I've done operations roles, and I've done sales roles now. And so I'm sort of collecting what I would say is building blocks to understand how to begin to think about doing that. And so that's probably down the line, and whether that's, building out a side hustle flower company into a more robust floral company of my own, or completely revolutionizing the way that we do something. I'm not quite sure yet, but I think that's sort of what I would like to do at some point. Either that or just ditch it all and go live on a farm, grow flowers in Wyoming, call it good. Split, depends on the week, but yeah, those are kind of the two paths.
So when we hired Emma, we asked her what her goals were. She's like, I want a house in Venice and a Tesla.
That's what I said. Well, I've got the apartment in Venice now. No house, but I've got the apartment in Venice. No Tesla.
Yeah, her boss is like, she's financially motivated because she has big goals. We should hire her. Okay, so I ask everyone on the podcast at Spiffy, if you were me, what would you do differently at Spiffy?
It's cool. Like, I'll answer it, but I will say, like, in other companies that I've been with, there's like this glaring fatal flaw that I can see. Like, they just have completely disorganized branding, or like completely this or that. And there's just this glaring flaw that I'm like, oh, if I had to Which I don't actively see, as at least I can't see one that I'm like, oh, this is like a sinkhole of failure right here. Which is cool. So, but if I did have the power and I did have to change something, I think at least in LA, and I think I would see this in other warehouses, maybe it's just because I'm like organized, but like standardizing this is so minute, but I guess standardizing the warehouse operations, like they're all kind of organized differently. They're all kind of, they're moving at a fast pace, so they're disorganized sometimes. And I think adopting some of these Six Sigma principles for the van and the warehouse to like sort of streamline operations everywhere, I think the technicians, if you ask them, they would like, or I've talked to them like, what do you guys think of this? Like, yeah, we make do, it's fine. But I think there could be some efficiencies built there. That's sort of like in the weeds, one thing. Kind of big picture. I don't know if there's any, I feel like we have a pretty, like, things I care about, pretty flexible, like, work-life balance, pretty comfortable with all these. I think that this is probably what the podcast and what things, but the relationship that I have to the, like, HQ, I feel disconnected from them. And partly that is on me. Like, I don't spend that much time reaching out. I'm like, we're on the East Coast. I'm never going to get a beer with you, and I don't want to do Zoom happy hour. But that's
Zoom happy hour kind of sucks.
Dude, I would never. You're just drunk alone in your house. But like,
you've had that experience.
You close the Zoom and you're like, now what? Okay, now I just had 4 beers and I'm no. But
you need to get Zuckerberg to enter the metaverse. So a couple things. So it's interesting. Your perspective about the warehouses. So there's the warehouse thing, and then what else did you say?
Just the relationship with the HQ.
Yeah, but before the warehouse thing, you said something.
Oh, I just said I think the technicians.
Oh no! So you said there wasn't a. So you.
I don't think there's a glaring fatal flaw.
Yeah. So like you worked at we didn't really cover this, but I know this from your resume. You worked at the UCLA consulting company, which is like I'm a student at UCLA. We do consulting for business around the area, and so you saw 6, 8, 10 companies. Right? Some of them big, some of them small, but there's like go in and there was always sort of like, hey, they have a good business, but they're like jacked up in sales or more. You have this cool product, and you hired some kid to like do the logo. When you said that, I stitched that together with you want to be an entrepreneur, and I'll tell you one of the hardest things for me at Spiffy today in year 7, and I use this term because it helps me be better at it, but it's a grind, right? Like there's no more cool startup. Like cool startup is like year 1 and 2, right? Like trying to figure it out and does it work and who's your customers and when we first started Spiffy, we were Scott and I owned car washes, and we were trying to literally move cars off property because Saturday was freaking busy and we had no place for them. And so we started doing detailing at people's homes because buying a truck was cheaper than buying a new location, and it was cheaper than rent and leases and all this other stuff. And now we sell tires, right? And we do oil changes, and we clean trains, and and so there's all this stuff going on. But at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, my roles evolved to it's just like we grind out the details, right? We don't have any glaring flaws. I think Scott and I did a decent job on the strategy. Now it's like we just need to get better. And I did some coaching at UNC with entrepreneurs, and Scott does a lot of this today. And I'll tell you, it's we joke about ideas are easy, execution is hard. It's not for tourists. Tourists you can go to a foreign country and live there for a couple days. Like you can go to Cairo or Nairobi or Dubai for a couple of days, or you can live there, right? And the difference about being an entrepreneur and a founder is like you're choosing to go live there, right? And so you're not a tourist. We sort of use that word somewhat derogatorily. Are they tourists in the industry? And then you get to this point where you just got to grind it out, right? So I was on a call today with a couple of senior leaders in the company, and we were talking about the trucks, and we're like, look, we need to go do a revisit of the entire process. And someone said, well, things work. And Scott's like, yeah, I think we designed that truck in 2016. I know they work. We just, what are we going to do in 2025? Like we need to start looking at it. And we talked about a bunch of different things. And one, it's capabilities, and two, it's like cost and efficiency and all this other stuff. So I think that's we're in this phase where it's just like, and we talk about this on the ops call, like, we talk about moving our metrics that we manage a point, 1%, 2%, and guys get high fives for moving numbers 2%, right? Whether it's, sales or cost or savings or whatever it might be, or efficiency or ratings. Literally, we rank, we got to 4.8 out of 5 on customer ratings across the company. And I said, well, that was pretty good. And someone's like, well, can we get to 4.85? Can we get to 4.88? And I'm like, well, at some point it's going to be perfect. They're like, well, if it's perfect, then that's awesome. We finally, we'll go move on to something else. And so there's that grind side of it. So there's the grind, and I mean that in a good way, but that's just like sort of like what you do. And then, so the thing about the cities is interesting. Every city's different, right? The business mix is different, and the warehouses are different. Like, in some cities we don't have warehouses, right? We operate out of client sites, and so we're sort of a guest. In some cases, we've launched cities out of like storage sheds, right? Like, we still do have a couple of trucks running out of storage sheds, and so it's very difficult to standardize that. And we've seen that, we have this, one of the best things we've done in the last couple of years is create this management training program. We bring people in from all over the company of all different ranks and experiences. So like really young guys who are just into management, and then guys who are, 30 years in management. And they come to the headquarters for a week, and they come for that connection, right? You talked about, like, I don't really have this connection to headquarters. You never really had headquarters-based training, right? Like when you came in, we weren't doing that. You've been back a couple of times. And I think those things are valuable to come in and to sort of connect with the folks in the headquarters. And the people in the headquarters always comment about how neat it is to have people from the field in the headquarters. So it's like this really good thing. But then, it costs money. There's plane fare and hotels, and you're not sort of like doing your job locally. And so, but that management training program has been so inspiring for guys because they see different people's warehouses and they talk about different problems. And it's so interesting how similar our, we have one company, but our business in many different cities is just different. And so I think that's a challenge that we have to continue to try to standardize that because it brings efficiency and stability to the business. Interesting. I've done a couple other podcasts with some other guys. I've interviewed some other technicians and some managers. And the thing you find about the technicians is if you ask them, what would you do differently? Like, I just want my own truck. Like, I want the same truck every day. I don't really care which one it is. I just want my truck.
Yeah.
Right. And it's weird stuff like I just want to leave my cooler in it. And some of it's just like, I don't want somebody else messing with my stuff. And,
yeah, some of them are very,
mm-hmm.
they're like, oh,
yeah. Yeah. And it's hard logistically. We run 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and we can't economically afford to allocate. The business isn't you get your own truck, right? But we should try to do a better job. It's interesting if we can figure out how to, even if you just did split shifts, we're like, hey, here's my Spiffy buddy. Like I have the car, I have the van, first shift, and he's my second shift buddy or whatever it might be. Interesting. So what else? Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up? Do you have any questions for me?
Are you enjoying doing this?
I am. The podcasting or Spiffy?
The podcast.
Most days of the week I love coming to work and I enjoy the podcast. It's I sat in on a podcast with another group in the company. Like we were talking to some other people and I sort of like took over. Not intentionally, I just did. The guy's like, you did a really good job with that. I'm like, okay, well, thanks. And he goes, have you done this before? Were you trained? I'm like, no. I joke. I think you've heard me say this, I can talk a hungry dog off a meat truck. And so I think being inquisitive and doing that is fun and interesting. The thing that, I'm very proud of the company, and I think we have a great team, and I hope that the podcast connects the team, right? And so it's more than just the ops call where, you get called out for being successful or for not, right? The ops call can be brutal sometimes. And so that's a big part of it was like, how do we connect folks in different parts of the country? We just have these guys who have great stories, right? And a lot of it's their own work and what they persevered through. And then some of it's just, Spiffy was a great platform for them and a great home. And so, my hope is we get to tell those stories. people listen to them and they get inspired to come to work and be part of a bigger team and a bigger family, and they stay here for that. And so we'll see. Yeah. All right. Hey, so my name is Carl Murphy, and I'm the president and co-founder of Spiffy, and this is the Operations Underground. And we have interviewed Emma Hampton, sales executive from Spiffy on the West Coast. And that is it for this week. Thanks.
Thanks.